Welcome to the Sci-Fi Continuum. I'm Stan, your narrator. Make sure you subscribe to our channel for more stories. Zach Millison woke up groggy, his head throbbing like he'd lost a drinking contest with a cement mixer. The last thing he remembered was stepping out of his favorite burger joint, scrolling through his phone. Then a bright flash and nothing. Now he was strapped to a sleek, padded table in what looked like a high-tech lab. Overhead, soft white lights pulsed rhythmically, casting an eerie glow over gleaming silver walls. Strange, humming devices surrounded him, some floating in mid-air, others clicking and beeping as if they were discussing him in a language he didn't understand. And then there was her. Zach blinked hard. Standing over him was the most stunningly alien woman he had ever seen, mostly because, well, she was the first alien woman he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered like polished silver, smooth and flawless, as if sculpted from liquid metal. Her hair, inky black and sleek, was tied back in a tight ponytail, exposing the sharp, elegant features of her face. Deep-set eyes, a shade of glowing violet, studied him with intense curiosity. And her hands, delicate, cool to the touch, and currently hovering over his bare chest. "I see you are awake," she said, her voice soft yet clinical, as if observing an unusual lab specimen. "Yeah," Zach muttered, his throat dry. "And tied down. Not exactly the welcome wagon I was hoping for." The alien woman cocked her head, intrigued rather than apologetic. "Restraints are necessary. Your species has unpredictable physical responses to stress. I require stillness for accurate data collection." "Right, data collection." Zach squirmed slightly, testing the bindings. They were snug but not painful, holding his arms just enough to prevent movement. His shirt was gone, leaving his torso exposed. The situation should have been terrifying, but his captor's expression wasn't malicious. If anything, she looked fascinated. She leaned closer, one cool hand tracing along his collarbone. Zach shivered. "Muscle density is remarkable," she murmured to herself. "Fascinating structural composition, and this." She brushed her fingers across his chest, then down the line of his abs, the touch light but lingering. "Astonishing texture. Your epidermal ridges react to stimulus in a way I did not anticipate." Zach exhaled, suppressing a laugh. "Lady, I don't know what kind of research you're running here, but in human culture, touching like that usually comes with dinner first." She paused, blinking. "Is that a requirement?" he snorted. "Not a requirement, just—" "Wait, what? Who are you exactly?" The alien woman straightened, clasping her hands in front of her, though her gaze remained locked on him with almost unnerving interest. "I am Dr. Valara Rin, leading xenobiologist of the Visari Science Council. My mission is to study lesser-known species and their biological functions. You, Zach Millison, are a most intriguing subject." "Uh-huh." Zach swallowed hard as her fingers brushed along his shoulder, tracing the shape of his bicep. "So, Valara, when you say study—" She met his gaze, her expression perfectly serious. "Full physiological analysis, comparative biology, sensory mapping, possible reproductive compatibility." Zach coughed. "Reproductive compatibility. Damn, you don't waste time, do you?" Valara tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing slightly. "Your heart rate is increasing. Are you experiencing distress?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that I've been kidnapped by a sexy, silver-skinned scientist who won't stop feeling me up in the name of science." Valara's fingers stilled. "You find my methods arousing?" Zach groaned. "Okay, that's not what I said." "Interesting." She leaned in again, her warm breath brushing against his neck as she studied him. "Your species' response to touch is more pronounced than anticipated." Zach shut his eyes. This is not happening. This is a dream. A weird, sci-fi fever dream. Valara, meanwhile, continued her study, pressing her fingertips against his chest again, her brows knitting together in concentration. "Your body language suggests you are both frustrated and intrigued. Are these common conflicting emotions in human males? Zack let out a ragged sigh. Valara, if you don't want me to die of sheer embarrassment, maybe ease up on the touching. She pulled back slightly, looking genuinely contemplative. Noted. But her gaze lingered on him, and Zack swore he saw something in her expression. A flicker of curiosity that went beyond just scientific interest. For the first time, it occurred to him that maybe she wasn't as unaffected by this as she pretended to be. Very well, Valara finally said, stepping back. We shall continue the examination in a controlled manner, but I must document all responses thoroughly. Zack groaned, already dreading what that would mean. One thing was for sure. This was going to be the weirdest, most frustratingly hot abduction in human history. Zack had been in some bizarre situations before, like the time he woke up in a stranger's bathtub after an ill-advised Vegas weekend. But this took the cake. Valara, his silver-skinned captor, was utterly serious about her research. After their first close encounter, she had moved on to what she called controlled variable assessments. Zack wasn't sure what that meant, but judging by the way she had just strapped one of his arms down while leaving the other free, he had a feeling this was going to be interesting. Valara stood at a sleek console beside him, adjusting holographic displays filled with symbols he couldn't read. The soft hum of alien machinery pulsed around them, making the moment feel even more surreal. We will now assess voluntary resistance and tactile endurance, she said, as if that explained anything. Zack sighed. You know, most people just call it tickling or teasing. Valara blinked, clearly puzzled. Clarify. Teasing? Oh, she was deadly serious. Zack groaned. Never mind. She approached again, her silver fingers gliding along his forearm. They were cool against his skin, a stark contrast to the warmth radiating from his own body. The touch was light, almost too light, like she was testing the texture of his skin as much as his reaction. Zack tensed. You know, in human culture, we usually have a thing called personal space. Valara ignored his comment, watching closely as she traced the muscle of his arm, up toward his shoulder. Your epidermis is highly reactive. Your body tenses in response to even minimal contact. That's usually what happens when a gorgeous alien keeps stroking me like I'm some kind of pet. She paused, her glowing violet eyes narrowing slightly. You associate tactile stimulation with pleasure? Zack let out a dry laugh. Under the right circumstances? Absolutely. Valara considered this, tilting her head. Does attractiveness enhance responsiveness? Zack opened his mouth, then closed it again. You seriously don't know how attraction works, do you? She studied him for a long moment, her gaze so piercing it made him shift under the intensity. Then, as if testing a theory, she slowly pressed her fingers against the center of his chest. Zack inhaled sharply. Her touch wasn't just cold anymore. It was electric. The warmth of his skin seemed to transfer to her, heating her fingertips as they traced downward, pausing just above the waistband of his pants. A slow, deliberate glide, soft but lingering. Zack clenched his jaw. Holy hell. Your heart rate has increased by 17%, Valara murmured, intrigued. Are you experiencing distress? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's the fact that I've been kidnapped by a sexy, silver-skinned scientist who won't stop feeling me up in the name of science? Valara's lips parted slightly. You find my methods stimulating? Zack groaned. Okay, that's not what I said. Interesting. She leaned in again, her breath warm as it ghosted over his collarbone. Before he could react, her lips brushed lightly against his skin. Zack jerked slightly, a shiver running down his spine. It wasn't a deep kiss, just the faintest pressure, a barely there warmth against his shoulder. But the contrast between her cool touch and heated breath made his stomach tighten. Valara pulled back immediately, her expression thoughtful. Contact with the lips produces an amplified response, she noted. Zack exhaled sharply, trying to regain control. Valara, what exactly are you hoping to learn from this? She straightened. Understanding human sensory thresholds. Your species exhibits a strong physiological reaction to certain stimuli. I must determine the biological function. You're trying to science your way through attraction? She frowned slightly. Attraction? A chemical response, yes? Zack huffed a laugh, shaking his head. It's a lot more than that, Valara. She studied him for a moment longer before reaching for the strap around his wrist. With a quiet click, it unlatched, leaving him unrestrained for the first time. Zack rubbed his wrist but made no move to bolt. He wasn't sure if that was because he couldn't, or because a part of him didn't want to. Valara stepped back, still watching him. Would you be willing to demonstrate? He blinked. Demonstrate attraction? Yes. I believe first-hand observation may yield the most accurate results. Zack stared at her, waiting for the punchline. But Valara, in all her silver-skinned scientific glory, was completely sincere. He ran a hand down his face. Oh, you have no idea what you're asking for. Valara's eyes glowed with intrigue. Then you must show me. Zack chuckled, low and incredulous. Sweetheart, don't say I didn't warn you. And with that, he leaned in. This time he was the one doing the touching. His fingertips brushed the smooth line of her jaw, testing the cool, silken texture of her skin. Valara's breath hitched slightly, a barely perceptible reaction, but it was there. Encouraged, Zack traced lower, skimming his thumb over the soft curve of her lower lip. She parted her lips slightly, blinking as if the sensation was entirely foreign to her. Fascinating, she murmured. Zack smirked. Oh, sweetheart, we're just getting started. Zack had always considered himself a man of science, not in the way Valara was, but in the way that he trusted the evidence. And right now, the evidence was pretty damn clear. One, he was wildly attracted to this silver-skinned alien scientist. Two, she had no idea what she was getting into. He really, really didn't want to stop. Valara remained still, watching him with those glowing violet eyes, her usually detached expression shifting into something softer. Curiosity, maybe? Uncertainty? Zack traced the curve of her cheek with his fingertips, marveling at the way her skin seemed to drink in his warmth. You're not used to being touched, are you? She blinked, her lips parting slightly. Physical contact among my species is rare. It is reserved for necessary functions. Zack smirked. Sweetheart, I hate to break it to you, but on Earth, this is a necessary function. Valara tilted her head. Explain, he chuckled. Oh, I'd rather show you. Before she could analyze that response, he leaned in, brushing his lips against hers in the gentlest of kisses. A test, just as she had tested him. But unlike her clinical touch, this was deliberate, coaxing. He felt her sharp inhale against his mouth, the way her body tensed before slowly, hesitantly, melting into his. Her lips were cool at first, but as the kiss deepened, they warmed against his. Her fingers, which had once explored him with detached precision, now gripped his shoulders with something more instinctive, more human. A quiet gasp escaped her as Zack's hand moved lower, tracing the subtle curve of her waist, pulling her closer. He could feel her heart, if that's what it was, pounding against his chest, out of sync with his own, but just as wild. Valara pulled back slightly, her breath uneven. Your method of data transfer is highly effective. Zack let out a low laugh. Sweetheart, I don't think you need a lab report to figure this one out. She didn't respond, at least not verbally. Instead, she grabbed him, pulling him into another kiss, this time with no hesitation. The cool metal walls of the lab faded away, the beeping monitors and sterile white lights nothing but background noise. For the first time since he woke up on this ship, Zack wasn't thinking about escape. And when Valara's hands traced his skin, no longer studying but wanting, he knew they were long past the boundaries of science. Zack lay on the exam table, grinning up at the ceiling while Valara sat beside him, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite place. She looked different, less like a scientist, more like a woman who had just learned something new about herself. "So," Zack murmured, glancing at her with a lazy smile. "Do I pass the experiment?" Valara hummed thoughtfully. "The results are inconclusive. Further testing may be required." Zack chuckled. "That's just science talk for you liked it." She didn't deny it. Instead, she reached for his hand, running her fingers over his knuckles, as if memorizing the shape of them. This was unexpected. "Yeah?" Zack squeezed her hand lightly. "What happens now?" Valara hesitated. "Protocol states that I should return you to your planet and erase any memory of this encounter." His grin faltered slightly. "Erase my memory?" She nodded. "It would be safer. You were never meant to be part of this study." Zack studied her for a long moment. "And what do you want to do?" Valara exhaled, something uncertain flickering in her gaze. Then, for the first time since they met, she smiled. "I believe I will be keeping this data for myself." Zack smirked. "Smart choice, Doc." She reached for the console beside her, pressing a few buttons. A soft hum filled the room as the restraints on the table retracted fully. "You are free to go, Zack Millison." Zack sat up, stretching lazily. "And if I don't want to go?" Valara tilted her head. "Are you proposing an extended study?" He grinned. "Let's just say I think you've got a lot more to learn about human behavior. And lucky for you, I'm a very dedicated teacher." Valara's violet eyes glowed, her expression both intrigued and amused. "Then I suppose I will require more hands-on research." Zack chuckled, pulling her into another kiss. Yeah, he could get used to this.